very important component of mindful leadership is appreciation and recognition. According to the Huffington Post, appreciation motivates employees to work harder and it prevents them from having a wandering eye. How does it feel when you've been working really hard and somebody comes up and appreciates what you've done? Doesn't it feel good? Right? It feels great. And how does it feel when you've been just really working day and night, overtime, weekends, project is done, it's successful, no one says anything. It's almost like, yep, you were expected to do that, and here's your paycheck. A paycheck is good, but it's not always enough. Right? So it's so important to be appreciated, because we have sort of a human need to be appreciated for the things that we've done, and it's important to appreciate. So the question we can ask ourselves, we can all think of a bunch of times when we haven't been appreciated, either by friends or family or coworkers, but let's ask ourselves this question: when was the last time that we appreciated a colleague, a fellow student, a family member? When was the last time that we appreciated someone? Can we be better at appreciating others? So that's something to think about, right? On a regular basis, appreciating others. And especially if you're in a leadership role and you have to give negative feedback, because every time we give negative feedback, it's like withdrawing from that emotional bank account. It hurts. The other person, you sort of hurt that relationship a little. Even if it needed to be said, it sort of hurts that relationship a tad bit. So we want to make sure that there has been enough appreciation before some negative feedback had to be given, some criticism had to be given, because that will allow that person to hear what you're saying. Because if we're just doing the criticism, every time we talk to a person, it's only the negative, then that relationship is going to collapse. And you're going to have a negative balance in that bank account. And so if we can appreciate more, then we really want to create a culture of appreciation, and where we can actually learn to celebrate and appreciate the success of others. Because what happens is when an environment, whether corporate or in your college campus, when an environment becomes very competitive, we're no longer so happy to see others succeed. It can almost be where we're happy when others fail. But we don't want to be cultivating that culture where we're unhappy to see others succeed and happy to see others fail. And this is a tough one, but we can ask ourselves, when someone is competing with us for something and they succeed, am I unhappy at that moment? Do I wish negative for them? So these are things we can ask ourselves, and really we do want to be able to celebrate each other's success. That's the culture we want to create. And if we can have that culture, there'll be so much more harmony, and it'll create a much greater level of teamwork. It'll create stronger teamwork, meaning that we're supporting one another and we're encouraging one another. So I want to just take an example from nature about teamwork. So I want to look at the redwoods. Right? So these are some of the tallest trees on the planet. Right? They're about 200 to 300 feet tall. Right? They can go from 8 to 20 feet in diameter, and they can live for hundreds of years, and some have lived for thousands of years. What's interesting is a tree that's 200 to 300 feet tall should have very deep roots. But these trees have very shallow roots. They go from like 6 to 12 feet. And these are massive, massive trees. So how do they survive all the storms and all the challenges that come? Their roots spread out, and they grab the roots of other trees. So there's an entire network of trees holding on to each other, and therefore they can weather any kind of storm. So we can learn so much just from nature, of teamwork. We don't have to just be the best one. Whereas if we learn to hold on to each other and support one another, everyone can succeed. And that's the mentality I think we want to be able to develop. Now I'm going to provide a simple communication formula. This will help us all communicate better. Ready? And here it is. Okay. So what this individual is telling us is that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Just think about that. That's a pretty deep and profound thing right there. 2 ears and a mouth. We take it for granted because that's what we come with, right? Now, we're being told that we should be listening twice as much as we speak. if we use our ears and mouth in those proportions, our communication will get better and our relationships would get better. Right? But we use them in the opposite proportion, and that's where we find ourselves in trouble a lot. Now, the other thing is, our ears are naturally open, and our mouth is naturally closed. Like everyone's mouth is closed right now. Not unless someone's yawning. No, everyone's mouth is closed. Yeah. So, you have to endeavor to open your mouth, right? But the ears are naturally open. They're just so. We're being told that this is what really needs to be used a lot. And actually, recently, my wife complimented me on my ability to hear, and she said, wow, when she saw me putting the slide together, she said, wow, your ears are always really, really open. I'm like, oh, thank you. And she said, yeah, everything goes in one ear and out the other. Okay, I'm like, all right, I need inspiration. I'm preparing a presentation. I need you to encourage me right now. So she's here in the audience, but I'm not going to point her out because she'll get really embarrassed. Okay. All right, so I'm going to give you another communication formula. This one I learned from the monks, okay? This one I learned from monks. So that whenever you communicate, especially if it's something sensitive, even if it's not, there's 4 criteria we can try to meet when we do any kind of communication. The communication should be truthful. It should be beneficial in some capacity or another. Let's make it in such a way that it doesn't disturb the other person. Can we be that thoughtful that it doesn't disturb the other person? Because sometimes you're like, I don't have time, we're just going to say what needs to be said. Yeah, but if you hurt someone's emotions, especially if it's in a work situation, how productive do you think they're going to be when they get back to their desk? Now they're upset. And finally, can it be pleasing? So it may not always be possible to meet all 4 criteria, but can we take a moment, mindful moment before any especially sensitive communication to think about, is it truthful? Am I sure that it's true? Is it going to help them? Okay, it's going to help them. How can I say this now so it doesn't disturb them and doesn't uninspire them, but actually maybe they're even pleased? So that could take a lot of time. But being a mindful leader means that we're mindful of how we communicate as well. So perhaps we can use this in our next communication and just think about at least meeting 3 of these criteria. And maybe we can meet all 4. Just imagine how positive our communication would be if we could do this more often. And having balanced emotions, a key component of mindfulness and mindful leadership, because if we're not controlling our emotions and we lose our cool, what happens is when we lose our cool, our intelligence shuts off. And then we say things and do things that hurt relationships in a way that you could destroy a relationship for the rest of your life. Right? So anger is one of those things that we have to be really, really careful of, because once we get angry, we start saying things and doing things that can really, we could regret things, and we probably all had that experience where out of anger, we reacted and we responded. Especially if somebody sends a sensitive email, maybe they criticize you, and you're like, oh, I can't believe this, and you hit reply, and you start typing away. Wrong time to send a message. Wrong time to send a message. Especially communication over email or texting when you're upset should not be done for a good amount of time until you've completely cooled off and regained your objectivity. So all of these things can be helped with mindfulness. And that's what we want to talk about, how it can help us. So in the past, people have thought, and maybe some people still think, that it's something spiritual and religious because it's coming from like the Eastern traditions. And every time you see a Hollywood movie, who's meditating? It's the monks, right? Of course, nowadays a lot of the movies have these like super kung fu monks that are just beating everyone up, right? But that's what they show in the movies. If someone's meditating, it's some guy in his orange robes with a shaved head sitting and meditating. But now, corporations and a lot of different industries are using it to become more positive and productive and less stressed. According to Forbes, it can help make you more productive. According to the New York Times, it can enhance creativity and memory. According to Psychology Today, it decreases anxiety, depression, and stress. And according to Harvard Business Review, it boosts emotional intelligence. So one of the things that I was studying as a monk, and which is what I sort of teach in corporations and on college campuses, is when we talk about mindfulness, one of the first things we have to understand is the nature of the mind. And what is the mind? Right? How do we understand what the mind is? I like to compare the mind to a hard drive. The hard drive has a capacity to store millions and millions of files. So our mind stores so much data that we can't even imagine. Every time we see something, smell something, taste something, touch something, or feel something, it gets registered in our mind. But we can't remember all of this. Another way I like to compare the mind to is a smart device. Right? Now, on our smart device, we have so many apps. Right? And a lot of apps remain open. We don't close them. At least I'm really bad at closing out my apps. If I used Google Maps 2 weeks ago, it's still open. I don't go around closing them. So my wife usually has to go around closing all my apps. She's like, okay, you've got all these apps open. It's slowing your phone down. I'm like, okay, go ahead and close them out. So the same thing, our mind has a lot of apps open. And one of the, and you know, it's like your phone comes with certain apps that you can't delete. Well, our mind also has certain apps that just you can't delete. One of those is like the money app. You're always thinking about money. Another one, real popular one, is the food app. We're always thinking about food. You're eating lunch, you're thinking about dinner. You're eating dinner, you're thinking about breakfast, right? So like when we were driving in here, I'm like, man, I hope there's some, looking around on Google Maps, I'm like, there's nothing around here. What are we going to eat? You know, there's just kind of like a little anxiety about the food app. So our mind is like, has so many different apps that are constantly open. But if we can close those apps out, what happens? The phone works better, the device works better. So mindfulness is about becoming aware of what apps are open right now, which ones are taking up my mental energy, and how to close them out so that I can focus on the things that I really need to focus on, so that I don't lose time and energy doing all kinds of things that I don't need to be worrying about. According to psychology today, an average person has between 25,000 and 50,000 thoughts every single day. That's, if you break it down per hour, that's 1,000 to 2,000 thoughts every single hour. So our mind is a very busy place. You know, if you try to go to, like when I was living in Manhattan, living on the Lower East Side, we were facing the avenue. So there was a lot of car noise and jackhammers in the middle of the night. You're just wondering, how did the city give permission to do this? They probably didn't. But there's so much noise, but I realized that the noisiest place is always in the mind. The busiest place is always in our mind. So the more we can control our mind, the more we have power over our mind, the more peaceful and happy we can actually be.